Welcome to the Orca. The proportional representation referendum is, of course, in full swing, with ballots due to Elections BC on November the 30th. Now, latest polling shows that support for the current system is just a single point ahead of support for Prop Rep, meaning this referendum could go either way. Iain Black is the president and the CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. He was also a cabinet minister the last time British Columbians voted on electoral reform back in 2009. And Iain joins us now via Skype from downtown Vancouver. Iain, hello and welcome.
Good afternoon, Rick, and to all of your many viewers.
As I said, we're coming down to the wire on this. How are you feeling about it?
Well, you know, it's a little confusing for me on the one hand because we've been through this twice in the last 30 years. And this particular go-around is very, very different than the last. The last time we had an independent body of ordinary citizens with a lot of support and a lot of runway to come up with and craft an alternative to the consideration of the voters of our province without any political involvement or partisan interference of any kind. And that's not the case this time. And so it feels a little bit uncomfortable because of the process by which we got here. There's been very, very strong language used to describe the process. I won't repeat that here, but we're very concerned about it at the Board of Trade. And given that the laws have also been changed to make it very easy for this to pass compared to other times that we've tried this, we're quite concerned about it.
You recently wrote an opinion piece in which you said that we're being asked as British Columbians to fundamentally change our democracy without being given crucial details of how these three proposed new systems would actually work, two of which have never been implemented.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I kind of link the 2 points, to be honest. I mean, we've had, until the laws were changed very recently by the current administration, we had thresholds in law for what it would take to change something as sacrosanct as the way that we elect people. And in my view, those bars should be really, really high. It's a very important question, and you should have a very overwhelming view of the general public from a large number of voters in order to make such a change. And the fact that the laws have been changed to lower those thresholds, both in terms of the number of people that turn out and the percentage by which they have to approve a change, is very, very problematic. And I don't think it's consistent with the value system of our organization. And then to your point, the questions that are being put in front of us are missing, at last count, over 24 pertinent bits of information. And the fact that two of them in particular, two of the choices being given to people out of the three, have not actually been tried anywhere in the world. That is, in my view, we are not a test case or an experiment when it comes to our democracy. So for that reason, the Board of Trade took a very firm negative view against the process itself that we're currently being asked to go through.
I want to go back to a point you just made in that answer, and that was that a majority of voters, a great number of voters, have to have a say in this. The way it's tracking right now with ballots returned, the numbers are minuscule.
Yes.
And it's quite likely that less than 35% of eligible voters will return their ballots. Well, whether it's yes or whether it's no, given the importance of this in dramatically changing how we vote for elected officials in this province, will either have the moral authority given the fact that so few voters returned their ballots.
Yeah, that's you've asked the absolutely most important question. Irrespective of how somebody feels on this issue, you're not, from what we can see now, you're not going to see the voter turnout that should give confidence to any government, irrespective of the political stripe, that they should be contemplating and proceeding with a huge change, a fundamental tenet of our democracy in terms of how we elect people and then ultimately try to hold them accountable for the decisions that they make going forward.
You know, critics of First Past the Post argue that a minority of eligible voters can determine the majority of power. This is another example of that, which some people will say, well, of course, because this was determined on the old system. But nonetheless, how do you deal with that? And how does the Premier, how does the Attorney General deal with this if they get the results of the referendum with a fraction of eligible voters having a say?
Well, it's at best, that's irony. At worst, it could become hypocrisy. In the case of the government moving forward with a very, very low voter turnout that by a slim margin decides to change something so important as to how we elect people. I think that the very critics of this system will have a great deal of additional angst over a decision by the government to move forward under the circumstances that you've just described.
As I said, you are a former cabinet minister. You served in the Gordon Campbell government here in BC. So therefore, you were elected by the first past the post system.
Yep.
But having been in government, having seen how government works, what's your prediction? If yes would win, how might that change how we do business in this province?
Well, and I touched on this in the op-ed piece that was in today's province. My big concern is actually the lack of accountability. There's been a lot of arguments placed out into the community, a lot of academics weighing in, a lot of political pundits weighing in about the pros and cons of these two different systems. My views and my concern is actually single in nature, and it's a little bit different than some of the other ones that have been put out there. In my view, it's one of accountability, and here's what I mean by that. You may not like Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. You may not like Doug Ford, perhaps, as a more of a lightning rod example to use. But there's no question as to who you will be upset with or happy, if you like what he does over the next few years, the next time you get a chance to vote. The problem I have with the proportional representation modeling is that, especially in a political environment like we have in Canada, you're suddenly going to have 3, 4, maybe 5 different political parties who have to come into a room together and hobble together enough support amongst themselves to form a government. That will require, by definition, compromise and trade-offs. And some academics will look at that and say, well, this is a good thing. This is what we do as Canadians. We compromise. Well, perhaps, but we've seen examples with the current administration in Victoria where the Green Party has fundamentally backed off 2 or 3 things that they campaigned on, that they said were absolutely religion to them, in order to continue participating in the governing body, or the government, if you will, of British Columbia. So then the concern becomes, in the scenario with 3 or 4 or 5 parties who all do something similar to what you've seen the Green Party do, who are you going to get angry with if you're unhappy with a given decision? And if the party that you voted for compromised on something that was really important to you so that they could be part of the government, they could be on the inside and help make the bigger decisions about healthcare and education and the justice system and how we spend the tax dollars, are you going to be angry at them for compromising and trading away the thing that was important to you? Or do you get angry at there are 3, 4, or 5 parties who were involved in that discussion and that backroom deal? So you lose that straight line, that wonderful bright light of accountability the next time you vote. You don't really know who to reward or who to punish, and that's my biggest concern in this.
And to expand on that, coalitions collapse all the time.
Yes.
Look no further than Italy, 65 governments since World War II. What does that do to the stability of government in BC, and what does that tell future investors or people who want to do business in BC, want to move to BC? What does that tell them about the political climate in this province if we have a tenuous coalition running British Columbia?
Well, looking at that from an economic lens, which is what I do in my current role at the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, the uncertainty takes 2 forms. One of which you've described, which is the average tenure of a minority government in Canada for decades is 18 months. So a minority government or a coalition government means that we'll be going back to the polls more often. The example you cited of Italy is a classic example. You just have to do that math backwards and determine how many elections they've had to have all those prime ministers since the Second World War. The second element of instability that is concerning to us at the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade is that minority governments or coalition governments, by definition, have to do backroom deals to stay in power. That means, by definition, they're spending more money. Very seldom is a compromise made where some party says, I'll give you what you want, but I'll give up my desire to spend money on a project or on a bridge or a road or a hospital or a school or a social program or some sort of initiative that really matters to me. I'll just give that up. I want you to spend less money. What happens is the opposite. You have 7, 8 people in the room from 7, 8 different parties, and everybody wants their priorities met, which costs tax dollars. So the second element of instability from an economic standpoint is that you've got a financial framework that's already stressed with healthcare and education expenditures. Well over 50% of our tax dollars now is going to be stressed even further, and invariably will lead to deficits, which is frankly just a tax on our grandkids. So we're very concerned about that as a business community.
Iain Black, always a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the time.